So today is going to be a discussion about record materia. It's a little weird going from the discussion I had last week on Tuesday that dealt with legend materia to something that's been in the game for a very long time and is not as new and as shiny, but still extremely important. Hold on, let me switch to creative right now. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to say that we were talking about record materia, and then I'm going to go and talk about something completely different. And that is type formula element in school. I've talked about this impromptu before when I was going over, um, you know, event previews, but I'm going to go into it for not a final time, but in its entirety now, because it does play into a lot about what record materia are about. So let's go and do that. There we go. So first up, I'm going to bring... Let's use some examples. Alright? Let's pick an ability. Let's say Chain Byra. Then we're going to write it down. Chain Byra. Thank you for the follow. And then we'll choose another ability, this time something more physical. How about Power Breakdown? That's a really commonly used ability. No, well, Full Break, even more common. So we'd write that down. And then we're going to go and do the same thing, but for Soul Break commands for bursts. Caspa mentioned this as we were warming up, and this is actually pretty important for record materia. So we'll start out with Warrior of Light, Stroke of Light. That sounds dirty. So Stroke of Light for Warrior of Light's first burst commands. Then we'll go and do something to get something magical. Can't think of anyone better than to use Sid Rain's Shining Moment. Oh my goodness. How perfect that goes with Stroke of Light. Shining Moment. Sid Rain's C1. Alright, so we got 4 abilities here. And what we're going to do is we're going to identify... Hold on, actually, I want to get one more thing. That's very important. Because Realm was just... No, Realm's not a good one. Never mind. Let's use Beatrix. We'll use her Night Protector for Soul Break. Beatrix. Oop, no. Okay, now we got our 5. Now we're going to go and identify all 4 of these things, type, formula, element, and school. And first we're going to start out with Chain Byra. So, Chambara, his type is BLK. Formula is magical, element is poison, and the school is on the ability sheet is on the complete left side, and it is black magic. So we'll go and write that down. So it is BLK, magical. How do they call it poison? Poison. And black magic. Next, full break. We've got PHY, physical, no element, support. Then we go to burst commands for Warrior of Light. We see PHY, physical, wholly non-elemental. And at the end of the spreadsheet, oh shit. I'm sorry. This whole switching thing is going to get me. I hope it doesn't screw up too much. Anyway, so we had physical, or PHY rather. Physical, wholly non-elemental element. And then at the end of the sheet on the burst commands, we have the school column. And that is a night ability. And next we have Sid Reigns. Shining Moment is BLK, Magical, Dark Holy. And in the last column, not the last column, but the last one that's relevant to us, is a Black Magic School. And last but not least, we go to Beatrix's Burst Soul Break. Night Protector is physical, or PHY, sorry, physical, holy. And its school, so you notice there is no school column. The soul breaks do not have schools. Okay, now we go back to the text editor for a second. So we have our 5 little examples here. And I didn't order them. Hold on. Can we tab with this thing? Yeah. Get out of there. So we've identified the different characteristics and traits of these, and it's important to understand these and how they differ, because just because this says black magic doesn't mean that these are always linked. I should have chosen Nat ability. Shoot. Well, anyway, there's some things called Nat in the game. Actually, I'll go get it now because it is pretty damn important. They don't exist much anymore. But I know Renoa's got one, so I'm gonna go get it. Because I have it. Wishing Star, Renoa's first Super Soul Break, is hot garbage. And not least because it is nat damage. So I'm gonna write that down while you guys can't see. Yeah, I should have used Yuna's. Because I guess that's more relevant. Yeah, I'll switch it. I'll use Tiny Bee instead. Because that's actually something people may decide to use, but Wishing Star is something I hope people only use in jest. Okay, now back to the text editor. So we got a couple more additions to the list, but that's fine. All right. First off, we have Chambara, which is a BLK type, magical poison, black magic. And if you notice, you go down this column here, we have BLK physical, and Nat. There is another commonly used damage type, and that is summoning. It'll just be SUM, and that's an important one too. Yeah, it's weird. Oh, is it? It's true. Yeah, Strider is right. Both of the announcements for the Black Magic and the White Magic Luckies are scheduled for tomorrow. However, they're both really bad, so... Well, the Black Magic is really, really bad. Please, God, stay away from it. However, the White Magic could possibly be good for some people. They have been mined. Yes. There you go. Okay, so we have all these damage types, and it's important to realize what these all mean, because the record materia and legend materia eventually that we get in the game, yeah, there's way too many crap relics on the Black Magic banner, affect different portions of these, and what you should be doing when you decide on giving yourself a record materia is lining up whether that record materia affects everything that person is going to do. And like, say we were talking about before the stream started, someone brought up Squall's new Burst Soulbreak and what the best RM would be to use with it. The thing about Squall's Burst Soulbreak is the power is in the burst commands. So using something like Ace Striker or Battleforged, or the most common Soulbreak increasing abilities, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because you don't really, since you're capitalizing on burst commands, then recasting his burst before its time doesn't really make all that much sense. So we were talking about double cast instead, because the possibility of double casting is really a really good thing for him. And that's why his 35% legend materia for chance for dual cast is really good, because it increases his ability to get those junction stacks up. Um, and by getting the junction stacks up, it lets him use his low end roar more times within the scope of a single burst. So these don't actually work out for him, and it's interesting when these don't work out because then you get blast off into the great beyond of record materia that could possibly be good for somebody. And in Squall's case, I think the best would probably be Squall's a weird one. This is probably a bad example, but the best one for Squall would probably be I don't even know if I have it on that list. That's why I'm going to look it up. Orlando's level 99 record materia called Gathering Storm grants Thunder God's Might at the beginning of the battle. This allows Squall to reduce all of his cast times by 66%, which is an incredible cast time reduction. And in doing this, you start out the battle, you life siphon immediately, and you get up and use his burst, and you should have enough left of Thunder God's Might to get quick cast junctions off, which allows you, within the scope of your burst mode, to do more low end roars. Really, that is what you're looking for with Squall. How many low end roars can I do? And how can I improve how many I can do? There are two different types of materia that allow you to do this. One is Thunder God's Might for Orlando. The other is dual cast materia, Bart's, I believe. Yeah, Bart, Spellblade Master, 13% chance to dual cast Spellblade abilities. Right, Celeste is actually a really bad one. I think Celeste is only 30%, right? Yeah, I don't even have it listed here because it's not really all that relevant. Oh, wait a second, Celeste does get the 99 one as well. Yeah, she does. So she has both the 30% and the 40%. It looks like it's good, but it's actually not. If I was going to use an ability damage increase, I would use... Or if I were going to use a damage increase rather than a dual cast or Orlando's, just type exclamation point spreadsheet in chat. And you will get access to the spreadsheet URL. I would use with him... Where are you? Here. Physical weapon RMs. I would use one of these, depending on what you're using with Squall. Which would most likely be Cloud's 30% sword damage. Because this is very important. Celeste's ability school one that we just pointed out, 40% of Spellblade ability damage, does not apply to soul breaks. And Squall's opener for his soul break actually does a significant amount of damage, and this would not affect it at all. And that's why we got into this in the first place. Is Knight Protector and Trigger Happy are both soul breaks on this list. They do not have schools, so record materia that increase school damage, which Celeste's last record materia does, would not affect Squall's opener. I would rather use the 30% all damage, because he would have a sword equipped, so that would affect everything he did, including Life Siphon. And I would use that over Celeste. However, Squall's a little crazy bit of an example because he benefits so wildly from dual cast, and specifically from Orlando's Thunder God. Exactly. You don't want to focus on increasing your damage output with Squall because his damage output is so high to begin with, what Soric says. And you're probably going to be capping. And that is going to be the name of the game when I get to talking about the dual cast materias, is when you're capping, dual cast gets much increased value because normally you want plus damage. You want to increase your damage output. Dual cast is actually, like, even the summoning is not a good chance. compared to, I mean, over a long enough timeline. Say you use Sabins on a monk. He has a 13% chance to dual cast his abilities. On a long enough timeline, that means he increases his damage output by 13%. That's actually quite low. I'd prefer to use Zell's No Chicken Wuss. 30% fist damage if you're running a fist on him, or Refi's Throne if you're running Throne, or whatever. However, these increased damage record materials don't do anything for you if you're capping out. So if you're using Fires Within against a fire vulnerable boss, and you're doing, 19 to 20,000 damage with it, which is near its cap, then you'd find more benefit in using something like Dual Cast Monk, because the 13% would exceed the amount of damage increase you get from Fist Weapon, because the damage cap hinders your damage potential. They don't stack. They're used in conjunction. So, say you had a 35% chance to dual cast with Squall's Legend Materia, and you equipped Bart's Spellblade Master for 13%. That doesn't give you an additive bonus. That doesn't make you a 48% chance to dual cast Spellblade abilities. What it does instead is it gives you a 35% chance to dual cast Spellblade abilities and a 13% chance to dual cast Spellblade abilities. And I am almost positive that they can proc all at the same time. So if you say you're rolling a dice between 1 and 100, and you got both of those, that Legend Materia and the Record Materia active, and you roll a 12, that means both of them hit. So you do 2 extra attacks. So right. So it's better. I'd take the 43.45% chance and a chance to triple over a 48. I'm sure a lot of other people would too. Especially for Cloud, or Squall, because if you're able to triple like anything that he does from his burst category, then you're in damn good hands. Okay, so we basically covered almost everything that I wanted to here in trying to communicate how important all 4 of these characteristics of abilities are. Let's see, is there anything here that doesn't really qualify? Well, I guess Nat. I didn't talk about Nat damage. It just means it's an acronym for not a type. It means it doesn't actually have a type, and I don't believe that there's anything in this game that specifically increases Nat type damage. Which means if you were to use Yuna's Trigger Happy and then use her Scatter Shot, you would not gain any damage boost by using... I think it's all the way at the bottom, isn't it? Yuna's Last RM, which is 30% summoning damage. Renoa's Last RM, which is 25% black damage. Penelo's Last RM, which is 30% white damage. There is no RM in this game that you could use to boost the amount of damage that Yuna does with her Tiny Bee. It's one of the many reasons why it's as widely panned and disliked as it is. Nat damage does have a small benefit in the fact that it doesn't trigger counters and stuff, because usually when you read the AI for a boss and read the guide, they'll say 25% chance to counter BLK or PHY type attacks. So if you're doing Nat damage, you wouldn't actually have a chance to trigger any of those attacks. So it's a non-counterable attack. However, with the introduction... See, this was way back in the day, but with the introduction of prominent forms of summoning damage, like Alphino's Burst Soul Break, and the fact that summoning can be increased, and summoning doesn't trigger counters on just about everything, means that nat damage is pretty much the most disliked damage type in the game that we can get. So, there you go, Tiny Bee in a nutshell. This is weird, because I looked on Enliers, and apparently the school that they have listed is called Special. I don't even know what that means. It doesn't have a note attached to it, so I'm assuming it just means no school, like a burst soul break. So even worse, there's no way to boost the damage of scatter shot through school increases. And what Lemonade means by that is not SHT for shooter, that is SHT for shit. Okay, so now we're done with that. I'm fairly confident. Is there any questions anyone has about the 4 damage characteristics? Before we get into the actual list of record materia. You said Elf should use Yuna's RM. I will get to that, Caspa. I was only making a comment about how Alphino has the things that he does, because not only his Soul Break is SUM type damage, and his first command, or both of his burst commands are SUM type damage. So a 30% summoning damage record materia does work very well on Alphino. However, I will get to the applications of that record materia when it comes up on the list. Because that's probably... You got Alphino's burst and you feel like you wasted? Do you not like mages? Is it a dupe? Because if it's a dupe, that's a pretty bad dupe. Being a book, not exactly the best stat stick in the world. That one works too, Lemonade. It, like what I was trying to communicate with the damage types is just make sure that the RM you're giving, if you're increasing their damage, increases all of their damage. I guess you could do calculations if you want, but Alphino basically does all wind damage, so giving him a 30% wind, I believe that one's Bart's, means that you're fine. Yeah, Bart's 30% wind damage. Just do that, and that increases all of his damage. And I believe the calculation is a little different. However, it's very similar. Between giving him summon type, which everything that he does is summon type, and giving him wind, and everything that he does is wind element. Okay, so we're going to move on to the actual record materials now. If anyone actually has any questions about the 4 damage characteristics later on, just let me know. So I've got the experience material lined up, and outside the normal everything else, because they're very important. They help people level up their characters for practically free. I guess free isn't the word for it. Free as far as stamina is concerned. If you're using experience materia to level up your characters, that usually means you have to micromanage them. You can probably auto battle, but if you're not increasing like your ability to clear waves and stuff like that, it gets a little bit more difficult. So you may have to actually micromanage characters while using these. But yeah, these are the 5 experience materials, and they're pretty damn important, especially for when we get to orb fests and stuff like that, because those are easy to auto battle even if you are using experience record materia. So these are very important for orb fests, which we get once every 3 months generally. Quick question: if I use an attack that hits multiple enemies, can I build up soul break faster than normal? No. It's unrelated, but I will go into this because it's pretty simple. Let's see, we got We'll use Crush Down, because nobody uses Crush Down. Crush Down is a 6-star ability. Hits all enemies. 2 group attacks. But you'll see over here, we have a... Oh, shoot. There we go. We have a column in the ability list. This is also in the burst commands list. We have just SB column, and it'll show you how many soul break points using that ability generates. Valley Garmanda works too. I just wanted... Valley Garmanda gets enough love because it's actually an excellent ability. Crushdown is lonely. He's very lonely. Let's give it some attention. Most 6-star abilities, not named Ultima, get 70 soul break points per usage, and it decreases by 5 from there by the rarity. Ultima does eventually get buffed to 70, but it's at 65 right now because Ultima stinks. And then we drop down by 5 by the rarity, because this would be 5-star Black Magic with Flare, Meteor, etc. 65. Some are weird. Full Break is 60, but that's almost forgivable because Soul Break is so damn useful that you're okay with that. I mean, I definitely would prefer it were 65, but... Here's a weird one. Summoning. Not all are 65. Alright, I got sidetracked way more than I wanted to. So, back to the text. Anyway, using an ability will get you... Right, that's... Yeah. Anyway, using ability will get you its Soul Break gain. That's it. If you double cast anything, the second cast does not generate any Soul Break, and that is including Life Siphon, which Cloud and Noctis will eventually be able to double cast. But using Valley Garmanda will be 70 Soul Break points, and that is it, unless you're using one of the Soul Break augmenting materias, which I will get to you right now. Good segue. These two are very important and should be the primary targets for anyone starting the game, or anybody at all. Having 2 people able to start out the fight with 1 bar of Soul Break already filled is just a necessary part of the game at this point, and it's really, really frustrating for new players to have these 2 record materia hidden behind randomizer gates. So I mean, you could get this on the first battle that you face if you meet the parameters to get these, or you could get it after the 150th, and that stinks. However, it should always be the priority. There are just utility and healing soul breaks that need to be cast at the start of the fight, like Wall, like Heiska and Buskas and Faithkas and Mingas and stuff like that, just to increase your ability to wage war. And they're absolutely necessary for completing higher tier content. Next up, we have the 5 augmenters. 4 augmenters. Alright, we have 2 that are exactly the same. One belongs to Tidus and the other belongs to Ramza. They allow you to gain a 50% increase in the amount of soul break points that you generate. So, take Life Siphon for instance. It generates 150 points. Or, okay, this is actually important. Another way of looking at this one, these 2, is if they give you 500 soul break points to start. Because 500 soul break points is 1 bar filled. Where with this, in my Life Siphon example, Life Siphon is 150. So that multiplied by 1.5, it's a little calc I got right here, would give you 225, because that would be 75 on top of the 150. So it would take, with two Life Siphons, that puts you at 450. So 2 Life Siphons is, with a Striker or Battle Forge, is very similar to this. And this is why a Striker and Battle Forge are almost as important as the first 2. And if you have something like Wrath, which gives you plus 3% attack and 180 soul break points. If you multiply that by 1.5, that gives you 270 per use. So 2 Wraths is 2 times 170, or 270, and that's 540. So Wrath, and you have 540 soul break points, not counting the amount that you get from damage taken. So 2 Wraths already gets you in position to use a soul break, and that's why. Oh shit! Undo. Control Z. And that's another reason why these are important. And why I use Life Siphon and Wrath here is because usually if it's a character that I wouldn't use Life Siphon or Wrath on, I wouldn't use these abilities. I'd look elsewhere to gain my soul break generation. There are exceptions. And that's people that are able to cast faster than the typical 1.65. So I'm going to go over to the spreadsheet for a second and bring you up another example. So we have a typical... No, this Penalty Strike is not a typical ability. Let's use something a little more typical, please. Okay, Blazing Twin Strike. This is a very useful Spellblade ability. Has a cast time of 1.65, and it generates 65 soul break points. If you're using a character in a Sid mission or whatnot, actually this was a bad example. Okay, we're gonna use something else. Support. There we go. No, and Trust is bad too. Full Break, fine. Okay, Full Break grants 60 soul break points and casts at 1.65. The typical cast time. If you're using this in conjunction with like Power Breakdown or Magic Breakdown on a support, and these are all you're doing, it doesn't really make all that much sense to use those two, because you're not getting a whole lot of benefit from it. Remember, we're multiplying by 1.5, so Full Break, would give you 90 soul break points per use instead of 60. Is Ultra Cure weird for the rules? Ultra Cure is 60, but has a high cast time. No, it doesn't. It has a normal cast time, so it's normal. All right. Anyway, so what I would do in that case, is probably look elsewhere for my ability to increase the effectiveness of the support. And really it depends at that point on the rest of your team. It just makes that person a low priority for increasing their soul break usage. Unless, and this does happen often in case of supports, they have like pivotal soul breaks that help out your ability to complete a submission. Say we have the Final Fantasy V event coming up in 2 days, and 3 days after that we've got the Sid mission, and maybe you have Ferris with Sea Lord's Broadside, and you're trying to hit a timing in the fight where Sea Lord's Broadside gets out before the boss starts doing crazy damage. Then you kind of have to either do the math or experiment by going into the fight and say, can I use something that increases their damage output, or do I use something that increases their soul break output, so I can get that Sea Lord's Broadside out and keep it up and make sure that is active for the entire fight to reduce the incoming damage taken. That is just an important thing that you need to figure out when you're doing these. And where I wanted to go counter to something like Ultra Cure and Full Break is stuff that casts faster. So we're going to go down to Ninja. Ninja have a much faster cast time, but they generate just as many soul break points. This means they cast faster, which means their ability to generate soul break points is higher than other things in the game. And that makes using the 1.5 good even when you're using these, and you don't have to be exploiting vulnerability. If someone has the if someone has the exact calculation, because what I'm going to do next is go into it a little further, because if you are exploiting vulnerability, that changes the calculation a little bit. Because when you're exploiting vulnerability, it increases your soul break generation by 1.5 as well. I don't know if it's an additive bonus or if it's multiplicative, but let's say for now that it is an additive bonus. So you got a ninja, say Yuffie's in your party in a Final Fantasy VII event, and you need someone that can do fire damage, and you don't like Reno, so you're using Yuffie, and she's using Smoldering Fire and just destroying this fire vulnerability. And you got Clear Tranquil, her soul break on her that is a little old Medica, but very useful Medica. And you're casting at 0.83 a second, and you're generating 65. However, you're generating versus a fire vulnerable boss. So this increases your soul break per use to, let's see, 30, so about 99. 98.99. I believe if you were also using something like a striker with her, that would be an additive bonus, which means it's not a 1.5. See, text editor. You have the 1.5 multiplication. If you were using a striker and exploiting vulnerability at the same time, I believe it's additive, which means it's 0.5 plus 0.5, which means multiply it by 0.2 instead. That's additive. So 65 times 0.2, which would be 130 per cast. That's a lot of soul break points, because that means in about 3 casts plus damage received, you're probably going to have a Clear Tranquil up. So 3 Smoldering Fires, Clear Tranquil, 3 Smoldering Fires, Clear Tranquil. That's a really good situation to be in. Steiner's RM. I believe it's RM2. Knight's Charge. Well, he's one of the weird ones. It's an RM3, but that's why I don't use the RM2, RM3 nomenclature, because it doesn't really work. Because different people have different things that go in those slots, and they're achieved by different reasons, and I don't know. I don't like those at all because they don't work. Yeah, you're right. It's, I guess, one of the things I said I wasn't as prepared as I would have liked to be. But I'm just trusting that everyone that has access to this also has access to the spreadsheet. And if there are interesting record materials that they like on here, then they can always go look up the requirements, which is use Steiner's Memory Crystal to chance to obtain the Steiner in party. But anyway, there's the difference in soul break generation. With reduced cast time, exploiting vulnerability makes it much more valuable to be using a striker or battle forged. And the next two are a little similar and provide decent alternatives. I think out of these 4, that Steiner's Knight's Charge is the worst one, because you want to capitalize on what it is that you're doing, right? So in the case of Lionheart, you gain times 1.5 soul break. For receiving damage, and this is really nice, especially nice if you're using somebody that has Draw Fire or Gaia Cross or whatever, or Sentinel or Magic Lure, and you're augmenting the number of attacks that you're taking. Or if the boss is like completely area of effect based, that makes Lionheart really good. But how I view Knight's Charge, because it's half and half. It's while these are 1.5 for using attack and abilities, while this is 1.5 for receiving, this is 1.25 for attack abilities and receiving. So it's got its foot in both lakes. Um, I view Steiner's Night Charge as the worst and the one to use after the others. I think the last time I used Night's Charge was for the Nemesis fight, because it was so good in the Nemesis fight, because you receive so many attacks that it made Lionheart was absolutely crazy in the Nemesis fight. But it was so good that this is just a lesser version of Lionheart. And I used one of these, I believe, on someone that had Life Siphon. No, I don't know if I use these at all. I think in one comp I had Alphino. And Alphino, and like Ishtola, like those two, because their first commands can be instant cast first commands, which means they cast and use abilities faster. It's like the ninja example, where the faster you're able to use your abilities, the more soul break you generate over time, which is good. So these are these are probably the best. This is the best when you're taunting in some way. Would I say Night's Charge is better than Ace Striker or Battleforged? I would not say Night's Charge is better than any of these three. These other three. Night's Charge is the worst of the four. They do for sure, Caspa. Well, I'll go look at that right now for you. However, and it is an important distinction, burst commands do not generate as much soul break gauge as abilities. So remember that. See this column? It's 50. And there are very few things, if any, that deviate from that. Oh, I saw 60. Of course. Ferris, for whatever reason, has burst commands that generate 60 soul break points, instead of the normal 50 for everybody else. But anyway, rule of thumb is soul break, burst commands generate 50 instead of 4-star, 5-star abilities, which generate like 60, 65, and 6-star abilities, which generate 70. God, is there anybody else? Why Ferris? I don't get it. Tyro. Oh, saw another. Balthier's Mud Shot from his really bad Soul Break 1, so that's not even relevant. Wow, that's it. Ferris is the only person in the game besides Tyro with a full 60 burst. What? Next step does get a 60. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that for too long. However, burst commands do generate soul break points. But here's the thing about their reduced soul break generation is very important, because a lot of burst commands are often used to exploit vulnerability. I could do that, but that was it was simple enough getting to where I was. See, we got X-Death, for instance. He's right here. So he's an Imperiled Dark, and he's going to be exploiting his own vulnerability. Sure. Which means that instead of 50 and 60, he would be generating 75 and 90. If he's hitting vulnerability, which he most likely is. So just remember that if you've got someone with the ability to use abilities, and you're like, oh, I don't need 5-star abilities anymore because I just have burst commands instead. But if you're not using those ability slots for anything, and the abilities that you could put there are as good or close to as good as burst commands, remember, you can get more soul break generation from using I believe vulnerability is 1.5. Caspa. I used to use One Eye General all the time, Lemonade. not just for Beatrix. I know you're just want to use her RM for her because it makes complete sense, but I'm just saying I used to use that record material a lot before Cloud got the chance to go to level 99. But anyway, continuing on. Generally the best because it's so easy to use these in conjunction with Life Siphon or fast cast abilities or exploiting vulnerability abilities. God, really reckon with those syllables, huh? And Wrath, which layer this benefit on top of each other, and it's really nice. So these are definitely the most useful. The next would be Lionheart for Squall. You put this, say, in the Final Fantasy IV event, for those that were here for me conquering Baigen. I brought in Cecil in that fight because there's single target physical and single target BLK attacks. And I just put Draw Fire and Magic Lure on him. So you couldn't do anything. However, by the time I cast Draw Fire and Magic Lure, and the fact that he had Lionheart on him, on the third turn, he was already able to use his burst because he was taking so many hits, and this was generating so much soul break that he was able to like burst like every other turn, which was part of what helped me finish and master that battle with my Sid mission team. Even though it wasn't a particularly good Sid mission team. My Final Fantasy IV synergy isn't that good, but was able to beat it anyway because of some good record materia usage. Alright, next we move on to the group of dual cast abilities. I already went over dual casts and the reason to use dual casts, but it's pretty short, so I'll go into it again here. The dual cast abilities increase your damage output by a small benefit for the most of the time. Because these percentages, if you just take them on a long enough timeline, all they do is increase your damage output by these percentages, which is 15%, 13%, and even the 20% for summoning is not high. It's not high at all. You can, of course, we can quit out of games and replay them indefinitely, and you can hope to get lucky and get 2 casts, which obviously is much better than these percentages suggest. Yes, Caspa, that's a good observation that I forgot to go into when I was talking about the Soul Break generation. Healers do make good candidates for Lionheart, because that's probably the best way that they're going to generate Soul Break. Unless you're a healer like Ishtola or Realm, you have an instant cast command, which means you cast abilities faster. Anyways. But there are situations in which these will increase your damage output higher than other stuff, even though these have such low percentages. And that's when you are capping out. So this one is one I use very often, or formerly I used to use Terra's. Terra has a 13% chance one, but recently we got Magus's MC2, and once we got that, we got the ability to get its 15%er. That's why this is listed here instead of Terra's. So this one is one I use often, because the Black Mage abilities like Chain Faraga, if I'm exploiting vulnerability, it happens very often that you do 9,999 damage times 2. And if I were to use, say, Renoa's down to Magical, another good RM, Renoa's 25% increase of BLK type damage doesn't do anything if you're already capping out. It is a 0 damage increase. So how you can increase your damage further at that point is to use a dual cast. The ability to increase your damage even further over the 20,000 cap. Because if you dual cast, then obviously your cap increases to 40,000 if using Chain Faraga or something else. And that applies to all of these. And you've got your little niche scenarios like Squall. Who has added benefit because of iteration mechanics, like his draw and junction. So the ability to dual cast those increases damage output for something else, for the low and roar, which is really nice. And being able to dual cast that too. I'd like to see a comparison down the line of whether or not to use something like Cloud's RM, which is 30% flat damage increase across the board. But I'm pretty sure dual cast Spellblade is probably the way to go with Squall. And outside of all of these, we have Devouts. Someone actually asked a question about this earlier in the stream. I just want to go into it here. Devouts is still a relevant record materia because often you're obviously not capping out when you're casting Kiraja, because a cap would be 9,999 health, but you are technically capping out because you can only heal someone for their maximum amount of their HP. So in order to increase your healing output, you do one of two things. You use this extra soul break generation, so you can use more soul breaks and heal better that way, or you give the healer the ability to dual cast. And why I still like this record materia is, even for a veteran player like me, I've been playing the game for a very long time. There are realms, like Final Fantasy X, for instance, where I have no medicas. So whenever I go into Sid mission scenarios, I like to use this record materia on my healer so I can increase their healing output in the best way. This would be the best way to increase their healing output. But I wouldn't disagree with using extra soul break generation record materia as well. You could also do that, because by doing that you do increase your the frequency in which you use your shared medicas. It's just, they only do so much. Okay, so that's the dual cast section. Next we have really niche record materia. With Ricard, this used to be one of the best record materia in the entire game, because way back in the day, before Shout, even with Shout, not a lot of us had particularly good synergy across realms, and if you had bad synergy, then even with Shout, you weren't reaching the attack soft cap. And this is how you reach attack soft cap with people, because no other record materia in the game increases your actual attack statistic as much as Dragoon's Determination. And this has renewed vigor as a record materia once they increased the soft cap from 589 was what it was back in the day, and it's received 2 buffs in the meantime. It's now up to around 800. So if you're using a attack buff like Onion Knight in your party, or even Shout, it can be very difficult to reach attack soft cap. So one of the best ways that you can increase your damage output would be to make up the difference if you have bad synergy or something with Dragoon's Determination, and this gets you up there and can increase your damage considerably. And yes, this is the best thing that Ricard has. Luckily, you only have to get him to level 65 for this to have a chance to drop. And we have its counterpart, something that still hasn't been duplicated to this day, is the 20% magic RM from Vivi. Definitely a bigger drawback than the little sap that Ricard gets. Minus 10% defense and resistance can be a game breaker sometimes. However, there still isn't anything in the game that increases magic output. I don't use Devotion as much as I did anymore. I'd say I'd probably use Dragoon's Determination more, because we have so many ways to buff magic now. With Faith, Memento Mori, Burst Commands, and entry buffs on Soul Breaks, that reaching the magic soft cap of 1054 isn't that difficult anymore. Or, thank you for the follow, Kisu Sose. it's not that difficult anymore. And if even if you're not at soft cap, you can get into the range of soft cap where a plus damage RM would actually work out equal to or better than this without the drawback of the defensive reduction. So while this is still a relevant RM, if you're trying to hit things like, say, Adia with her first command on her burst, if you actually need to hit a high magic number for it to be effective, then this can be a useful increase. But if it's just for any other mage trying to hit magic soft cap, it's not as useful anymore. And then we have this trio here, which generally go together. You're either using one or the other for certain fights, where say you want to start out a knight in an event that has single target black magic. You can start out the battle with Reflect in the first turn, use something that gives you magic lure, and that stops you from having to take up a turn on one of your healers if it's not real feasible for that to happen, for you to set up a Reflect strategy so the healers can, cast Shelga or BSB or whatever, where so this doesn't really get used that much because generally you do have someone that has White Magic 3 that has the ability to cast this on your knight. However, these are much more useful because knight ability slots are very high value. You can do a lot of things with them. So sometimes starting the fight with either Draw Fire or Magic Lure, and then, going from there can be really useful. Especially if later on in the fight you don't want Draw Fire or Magic Lure anymore. These are 25-second duration buffs, so it will fall off eventually, and without a with no reason or desire to refresh it, that may be a good thing. I don't think about that. But these are definitely niche, however, they are useful in certain situations. And now we get to my 99 RM list, which is probably one of the most important lists here of record materia. You get these at level 99 for all of these characters. So, for Adia, these are all pretty self-explanatory in how you unlock them. These are all very, very strong materia. We have, and they're all self-explanatory. If you have a weapon equipped of this type, you do this much increased damage. However, remember back to the start of the conversation when I talked about, damage characteristics. All of these, and this is important because I have actually misused these before. All of these only affect physical. PHY. PHY type. There is, I think, Instructor's Discipline. Quistis has an RM that increases whip damage by 20%. I used that so many times on Quistis because I used her mostly as a mage back in the beginning of the game. Where she's doing all BLK type attacks, but I thought that her record materia was boosting her damage by 20%, but it wasn't because it only affects PHY type damage. And that's why I have it noted up here that this is the PHY type section. Shimra, shh. Okay? Shh. Alright. So, these are all pretty damn useful. I mean, obviously, the most useful here is Clouds. I use it all the time. Truth Seeker, everyone should have this record materia. It's really, really good. And I'd probably put in second place. No, I don't want to say that. I use daggers a lot because I have a 6-star native dagger, Lux OSB, but I know a lot of other people wouldn't be using daggers because they don't have super cool, neat little relics like that. However, I've used everything here that I have unlocked, I've used at some point. I don't have Edwards unlocked, and I don't have Guys because Guys isn't in the game yet. However, I will be unlocking it when I have the ability. But this one, definitely useful. And Refi is a good example of this. And why you should use these record materias. Sorry, I need a swig of coffee. Okay. Refia's Burst Soul Break. We'll go take a look at it. And why these are very important record materials. And why I discard the general... I don't know... the general feeling that you should be using Soul Break generation things on your team. I don't like that. And the reason for that... Where you at, Refia? Is because there's a lot of characters in this game whose damage output is more heavily weighted towards their burst commands rather than the entry itself. And this has been a thing for a long time. Look at Refia's burst. We have Dance of Carnage. Does a 6.24 multiplier on cast. And it does a whole bunch of cool things. Attach Fire and Dance of Carnage both last 25 seconds. Refreshing them beforehand doesn't give you anything special. So there's no real point in doing that. And for Soul Breaks that have this, the Attach Fire or End Fire, how we usually refer to it now, generally have a lower multiplier. 6.24. Which makes Refia's, it's on the edge. Because one problem of N-element bursts, or N-element soul breaks, is they generally pay a tax. If you look one up, we have a super soul break that does a 7.84 multiplier, while the burst soul break does a 6.24. So we're paying a tax. And this is because, and this happens to like 90% of soul breaks that have the N element characteristic on cast. Why that is because the N element increases soul break damage by 80%. So if you were to recast this, it would do 80% increased damage, which obviously increases it well over the 7.84. So when I look at someone like Refia's, I weigh that one cast of the burst itself and increasing the damage output of that, and that's what I feel like I get from something like a Striker or Battleforged. But then I look at how valuable her burst commands are, and this is where I believe the strength of Rydia lies. When I use Refia's burst, I want to use her burst commands until the end of the burst, because I feel like her first burst command is so damn powerful that it overtakes the advantage of recasting your burst and getting that increased damage from the attach element. Because I look at it this way, you have attach fire already, so you're getting plus 50% damage on this burst command multiple times over, where if you were to recast your burst, all you're doing is getting a plus 80%. So what I would do with someone like Refia is give her a fist weapon or a thrown weapon, whichever, and give her No Chicken Wuss, which is Zell's fist damage or increased damage, and increase her damage that way. I feel like this 30% increase helps her more than a fast recast of her Burst Soul Break. In the future, that's going to be a little different. If you remember, the Refia gets a USB, which I don't know. I don't know how. Have any idea how Refia is going to be played all that much? I want to experiment, or talk to people that do get her USB if I'm unable to get it. But there may be a possibility where she just does so much extreme multipliers that she's capping out on the things that she does. So if you're capping out on the things that you're doing, increased damage doesn't make any sense to use anymore. In those cases, I'd probably use a Striker or Battleforged instead. But the way Refia is played right now with just her Burst Soul Break, increased damage is, I believe, the way to go. And that gets further proven for someone like... This is a more extreme example, and definitely makes a whole lot more sense. Like, you could make a case for either of them with Refia, but for somebody like Sid Reigns, it's a whole lot different. Sid Reigns, Metamorphose. Oh my goodness, my typing. Because Sid Reigns does not have an element on his cast. He still suffers attacks, though, which is interesting. Normal Super Soul Break damage for a single target is about 17. You see that on Nabat's 17.64. She's got high multipliers. It says random enemies. Random usually gets the same multipliers as a single target. But Sid Reigns still pays attacks anyway. Not that important because it's only 6 hits. However, anyway, this is what I'm trying to get at here. Increase multiplier if you have Doom. Whatever. Defense and magic plus 30% all allies for 25 seconds. There's no reason to cast that again before that 25 seconds is up. The only reason to cast this quicker than normal would be if there was any real benefit from the damage output perspective of casting it again. There is not. Especially because Sid Reigns, like Refia, his power, his damage output is definitely inside his burst commands, where he can give himself Lingering Spirit, increase his damage, or his magic statistic, and then just instant cast one. It's even notable on Sid Reigns' burst in particular that casting his burst Soul Break hurts you, because his burst Soul Break doesn't give you instant magical attacks. If you have the ability to cast his burst Soul Break while his burst is still active, you want to be using his C1, because you want to keep that instant magical attacks one chain going for as long as you can. And then, once it's done, you can't use any burst commands anymore, then we recast Metamorphose and we do it all over again. So Sid Reigns is an excellent example of someone who you do not want to use Soul Break generating things on. However, and this is why I used him as an example. Actually, I should have used Fusion. Fusion would have been better. Or Fusion's just a little different. Is when you have other Soul Breaks that you can cast with them, and you're generating so much Soul Break gauge with them that you're able to maintain both a burst and another Soul Break together. However, in most cases, except on something like Nemesis, I haven't seen the capability there. I haven't seen it exist enough. Where you could use something like Seraphic Ray. This would be a complementary Soul Break that you could use with it to imperil Holy, and then exploit the Holy vulnerability with his burst. If you have gaps, and this is the problem with a Soul Break as strong as Metamorphose, you're going to have gaps if you try to use both at once, even with Soul Break generation record materia. So think about how much damage you're losing by not having access to that instacast Soul Break command and not having the defense and magic plus 30% active on your party. So that makes Sid Reigns probably one of the best candidates for not using Soul Break generation and electing for damage and grease instead. So let's go take a look at... I know I probably should have used a physical character, but I'm going to go and use magical instead. No, elemental. I believe the best record materia for Sid Reigns is 30% dark damage. Because or 30% holy. Either one of the two. Whether you're using Sid Reigns for dark or holy damage. Because this is just the best way to increase his damage output. Start off the fight wrathing a few times, and then using Memento Mori if you feel the need to use Memento Mori. If you can reach Magic Soft Cap without Memento Mori, then I'd prefer to use his second burst command instead, to give him that 30% magic increase. But this would be what I believe to be the best record materia for someone like Sid Reigns. Because he benefits so little from Soul Break generation, that it's best to increase his damage output elsewhere. Right, if you're hitting neutral element with Sid Reigns, since his burst comes with the Fist plus Dark element damage, that makes this one a little more valuable because you're going to use it more often. However, there will be times when you're exploiting Holy instead, and you will want that. Okay, so back up to physical weapon. Does anyone have any questions so far? Because I haven't been able to keep as close eye on chat as I'd like to. Who else doesn't benefit from Soul Break Generation RM? That's a big question. Right, exactly, Lemonade. If you're using Sid Reigns as a holy damage character, you're going to want Cecil's 30% holy instead. Oh, before I get to your question, Caspa, I do want to point out one that I've gone into a few times already, but I want to include it in this discussion, is important to note that inside that spreadsheet, there is a difference between dark and darkness. This dark, inside the spreadsheet, every time dark is said, it's referring to the dark element. Where, if it says darkness, that means it's the ability school. And remember, talked about that at the start. Type, formula, element, and school. Garland's gives 30% increased damage to any dark element attack, while Cecil's, Dark Cecil's, increases 40% damage to anything that has a dark element school. Or, no, sorry, not dark element school, darkness school. Just trying to confuse everybody. And this is important to note because this is something that DNA has chosen to do on their burst commands, is ability schools are a little strange, where PHY type attacks, like Noel for instance, PHY, both of his burst commands are physical type, or PHY type. And the school is support, which makes sense because they're support abilities. You know, they does physical or attack, power breakdown, and magic breakdown. Where on mages, it's very different. We have black type, BLK type, but the school, even though Sid Reigns is absolutely a darkness school character, the commands do not get a specific school. Besides, they're just known as black magic. And that is definitely important to note. Physical characters get real schools that you can use, while magical characters do not. They just throw white magic and black magic on them, even though some people should be using ninja school for their magic, or they should be using white mage, or they should be using darkness, or they should be using, you know, any number of magical stuff, whatever. Summoning even. So if you look at Alphino. Oh, Alphino's different, because Alphino's awesome. Alphino's actually does use the summoning school. So that's important to note because for RM purposes, that means when we get down to this section, the ability school section, almost all of these are only really applicable to physical characters. Darkness ability, the only people that have darkness ability damage on their burst soul breaks are physical darkness characters. Ninjas, the same, physical ninjas. This one is a little different, but I'll get to that when I get here. So, okay, back to chat for a second. I saw Caspa said something. Who doesn't benefit from Soul Break Generation RM? Well, a lot of people benefit from them. But who doesn't specifically? That's such a. I'd have to compile a huge list of people, but that's why I was trying to use examples like Refi and Sid Reigns, where if your power is centralized in your burst commands, like you're so extremely powerful with them because of the extra critical damage that Refia does inside her burst commands. So look for people whose power is in their burst commands, or they don't have things that need to be refreshed on the opener. If there's no reason to cast their Soul Break faster than you can generate it normally, then there's no reason to use Soul Break generation. Alf... Sort of. The thing about Alphino is he does have one of those qualifiers I mentioned for it because he has an instant cast command. So his Soul Break generation actually gets really high once he starts bursting. But in order to get him there in the first place, you do need to either just be patient, and that's what I usually do. If anyone saw my Final Fantasy VIII Apocalypse fight, I just used Alphino with Kirasha and let him do his thing until his Soul Break came up. But I guess Alphino would be an okay one, because once he starts... Yeah, but see, Alphino is different, because though he's generating all that Soul Break gauge, there's no reason to recast his Soul Break beforehand, because all of his power is in that first burst command. That first burst command is so insanely powerful because of that instant cast. So you don't want to recast Alphino's burst Soul Break before you're done using your burst commands. And that's why I usually just let Alphino ferment on the sidelines, doing whatever he does, without Mako Might or anything, until he starts bursting. Alph's USB is a very strange thing. We can get to that another time. I don't know, you think so? I think Alph's USB is meant to be, at the end of it, it casts Dreadworm, or whatever. And everything that you were able to do inside of... I guess it's 15 seconds, isn't it? So that would require it to be recast. Alright, any more questions before I move on from the physical weapon damage increase? Yeah. The sages like that, the actual legitimately decent white mages that are usually known as black mages, like Xdeath, Alphino, and Kuja, are actually excellent characters for Sid missions because of that. They can just off-heal for you at the start of fights and stuff like that, and then, do whatever with their expansive ability pools. You don't have to worry about generating high amounts of Soul Break. I love characters like that. Okay, so no questions. I'm gonna continue on. Right now we have the defensive RM99s, and I noted these because recently I used an RM that I didn't want to use, but I could not think of a better RM to use, and that was Gordon's Grim Determination. Let me pull it up, because it's a weird one. Gordon's Grim Determination gave me plus 5 resistance for each 10% missing HP. I needed something that gave me defensive, because it was a character that their damage output didn't matter, and they didn't have a Soul Break, so this was definitely an Acid mission. So how do I increase, their value by, with their RM, outside of the normal means because none of the normal means really do much for them. And Grim Determination was it. However, we can do better than Grim Determination. I just didn't have the options, and that's on me. And that is in this little section right here. We have increased defensive characteristics flat out, and I'd prefer that over the increasing resistance of Grim Determination, even though it can get quite big if you're low health. I'd prefer you automatically get all of this everywhere. And it's just depending on... I want all of them eventually. This is so weird, Vincent, if you have a gun equipped. Just so I can cover, like I can say, okay, I'm going to equip this character with these synergy things, and okay, this is what I have, and then choose an RM based upon what they have equipped. Instead of equipping something based on the RM that I have. Gabranth just gets plus 20% defense everywhere for no reason at all, so that's kind of neat. But I prefer the Ishtola with robe, 20% each with robe. Delita, 20% each with sword. Vincent, 20% each with gun. Bosch, 20% each with shields. Leo, heavy armor. Dorgon, heavy or light armor. And helmet. For Go-Go, Final Fantasy 6. That's not for a while. It's very, very rare. Very, very rare. I have this on this list because I want to pick them up, because I want to make sure. However, I don't want to spend too much time on this section because they're not that useful. They should be a low priority. There will be times when these will be the best RMs that you can take, but it's so rare it's barely even worth thinking about. Angeal's wrong, he gets it with a sword. $25% with Bracer. What did I have? Yeah, 25% with Bracer. Defense plus 20% is too weak to consider for the list. Because there's no reason to use anything that just gives plus 20% defense when you have Gabranth's plus 20% defense. This RM can cover all of those. He does have sword, but it's a 20%er. It's his RM99 that has a 25% with Bracer. Anyway, not going to spend too much time on that section. Elemental is same category as the physical RMs. However, with the physical RMs, you're limited to physical damage, but these can be used for both physical and magical. And they're all 30%ers, and you just the highest priority one here would be people that you have that can do this type of damage well. Most useful would be Garland and Cecil, because those go well with someone who doesn't like Soulbreak Generation RMs like Sid Raines. Bart's, same reason for Alphino. It is weird, you're right, that Bio gets 2 with Edgar and Quistis. But yeah, it's this one's on you. I guess this one too. I use this one sometimes on Desh, because Desh is another one of those characters where if you're casting his Soulbreak opener, that means you're not getting quick magic attacks anymore. So it just makes sense to keep using his command 1. So if that's your goal with the character, then you want to increase their damage output instead of their Soulbreak generation. So Desh works well with that. I think I've used... No, I haven't used 30% water damage on Yuffie, but that's because she's a physical character, and I always have a 30% damage RM because she doesn't take up the swords one. So sometimes these can be handy if like you have two swords users, where one person uses the 30% swords, and the other character can boost by 30% in a different way. But Yuffie doesn't have that concern because she's not a sword user. So she's either using no chicken wuss or thrown weapon. Should Lightning be using her RM3 if you have her BSB2 or something like Battleforge? Well, Lightning is an Imperil user, and that absolutely is something that you want to cast more than once. You want to cast it as fast as you can, so she's a Battleforged user. Because with the ability to stack Imperils, so... and she has quick casted commands that are probably going to be exploiting vulnerability. Lightning is a perfect character for Battleforged or a Striker. I don't know, Caspa. That's why I don't pay attention to those at all. Obey the spreadsheet. Don't give any shits about what DNA writes inside the game for any ability description. Dirge, as a Quistis user, is it worth it for me to get her RM3 with her BSB? Yes. I mean, it's 30% damage increase, and she's a Wrath user, so she can just Wrath up and get damage increase that way. Plus, another good reason why, Dawn, that Quistis is actually one of the better users of these is because her OSB is plus poison damage, and if you have her OSB, you're going to want to use that everywhere. You never want to take that off, because it is almost certainly going to be better than a synergy weapon. And I don't believe there are any plus magic damage with whips RMs. Whip 4/4. Physical attacks 20% more. Instructor's discipline. My haunted RM. Magic 15% when equipping a whip. Not good. 13% with equipping a whip. Not good. 10% when equipping a whip. So there are no whip RMs for Quistis to use. That makes the bio damage 30% the best RM that you can be using on Quistis if you have her OSB. Sorry. I actually looked up. There's 4 of them. I forgot to post it on screen. I'll show you the 4 of them now. We have Rydia with 2 of them, but they're plus magic and they're low and they're bad. Krill has magic higher, but still bad. And Quistis has physical with whip. So all bad. I agree. It doesn't make much sense at all for the only damage increase whip to be physical instead of magical. With 30% RM for Dark Elemental damage for Sid Reigns, does it make sense to be doomed and use Command 2, or does something not stack there? They both stack. Well, Memento Mori, the magic buff that you get from Memento Mori, does stack with his Command 2. Just be aware of how much magic buffs you have in your party, and how close that gets you to the magic soft cap. You don't... The more time that you take with Sid Reigns not using his Command 1, the less damage that he's doing. So you want to only use as many magic buffs, whether that be Memento Mori or his Command 2, as it takes, and then start using his Command 1 as soon as possible. So back to this, and that was a good question, because Quistis's primary weapon does not have increased damage output, so 30% is her highest. The rest of these are okay too. They're like backups. I prefer the weapon damage ones, but these work pretty well in a pinch, especially for magic damage dealers, because they don't have access to a lot of the same ones that physical do. Magical does not have equivalents like this. They have a couple, and I'll get to that in a second, but not that many. It doesn't cover like the entire gamut of weapon types. So next we have Ability School. I pretty much talked about everything I wanted to talk about for Ability School, but does anyone have any questions on Ability School? These are very valuable RMs for SID missions, for when you don't have access to soul breaks, because remember, soul breaks don't have ability schools, so by using these you won't be increasing your damage output with your soul breaks. So in a SID mission scenario, if you're forced to use a lot of characters in SID mission scenarios that obey certain mechanics, or you're forced to use a support, because you basically need a support in almost every SID mission. And that's what makes Ferris's 40% support ability damage one of the most useful, is because that allows you to always bring a support, and if you don't have any soul breaks on them, that's okay, but you can increase the amount of damage that they're outputting by giving them 40% of support ability damage. And I have a lot of realms where I have supports that don't have soul breaks, so this is where I would use that. Blyven says, I have Desh at 99, for instance. Rafa is about to be 99. All this really tells me is I want to cry because I only have 799 characters and most of those RMs suck. Yeah. I don't have a lot of these myself. There are going to be new SID missions. But I'm talking about the SID mission for the realms that we get every single week. Like this one in Final Fantasy VIII, we were forced to use all Final Fantasy VIII characters for the Ultimate Plus Plus game, or Ultimate Plus Plus fight, in order to get to 3 orbs. And say I didn't have Dark Shot on Irvin, I would have used 40% support ability damage instead of 30% gun damage. Yeah, sure, Kaiser, but that's not really the point of the conversation. The conversation is, while you don't need them, there's a lot of really effective RMs at lower levels. I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of these that are the best at what they do. So yeah, no more questions about the ability damage. These aren't used very often by me at all. This is probably the most common one. Anything else is probably, I don't know. It's rare and only SID missions, pretty much. Because they don't augment soul break damage, which is an issue. So, and there's soul breaks that don't do damage, but those are usually utility soul breaks, and you generally want to be casting those at the beginning of the fight. And you have Mako Might and Dr. Mark's teachings for those, so those would overrule these then, too. Alright, so we get down to the magical one, which is a little all over the place. It's not as focused as the physical one. We have Sarah's 25% Mind with Staff. I have it listed here, not going to be used all that often, but since Mind doesn't affect healing all that much, this is only really good for white mages that use attack options, like Pinello, Lena, and eventually Ark. Who else has attack options that actually are worth a damn? So selfie doesn't count. Anyway, it's not really a good RM. Because there's just so few reasons to use it, and attack white mages aren't that good. Oh, Minwoo, another one that's not worth a damn. So we're gonna just not good. Oh, Vanille. But Vanille only has 2 hits, And Vanille can generally, just with the power of her burst alone, she can cap out. So increasing her mind is okay, but not as good as it would be on a 4-hit command for the like Penelo and Lena. Right, it's because of the res down and the fact that she buffs her mind at the start. No, I'm not calling Vanille's attack option bad. Just that this RM probably wouldn't be the best to use with it. Next we have Materia, and this is mirrored with Shantoto. 30% black damage, so this is similar to the physical ones, where we had 30% PHY increased damage with weapons, but staves are harder to come by. You're usually going to be using rods, and then the lesser used ones would be staves and whips and thrown. So while these are good if you've got a concentration of good staff magic stat sticks, not good otherwise. I haven't brought either Shantoto or Materia up to level 99 yet for either of these because it's just not an important RM to me because I have a lot of my damage is focused in thrown weapons and rods. And I guess fist weapon too for Sid Reigns. So mages and staves don't work well together most of the time. But there are a few where it does. VV's one. It makes sense. If I had VV's OSB, I would absolutely be leveling Shantoto to 99. Because VV's OSB would be used by many a person. And it's a staff. 30% white healing. This is more valuable to a healer than increase in mind. Because this just flat out increases their white magic healing by 30%. And Lena's too. Where 30% mind increase would not. And we don't even have 30% mind options. We only have 20% with rod and 25% with staff. These are better. However, white mage's healing output is almost like exclusively determined by their soul break usage. So say in a Sid mission scenario, you're probably going to want to be using dual cast because increased white magic healing only good in a Medica scenario where you're doing a lower potency heal but across many people. And if you're able to do a Medica, then that just means you should be using soul break generation stuff like Lionheart or Knight's Charge instead. And I say Lionheart or Knight's Charge even though I don't like Knight's Charge because you're usually going to be using a Striker and Battle Forged on more people using Life Siphon and Wrath. So these aren't terribly good. Renoa's 25% black damage is actually legitimately good because it doesn't have a qualifier on it. So anyone doing magic damage except for Yuna with her tiny bee likes this RM because if you're unable to hit a qualifier for like say I've got someone that's doing multi-elemental damage over the course of a fight, so I can't give them, say they're doing ice and fire damage over the course of a fight. They're hitting each. I wouldn't be able to give them an elemental one because I'd only be increasing by 30% one of those, where Renoa's would work for both elements. So this is kind of your baseline catch-all, and it's pretty useful. Yeah, Shantoto does have the highest magic. So this is probably the most beneficial RM we've seen here. It just sucks because it's on Renoa and she sucks. I already went over 25% mind. Yuna's summoning damage. If anybody has one of those key summoners, and there will be a couple more in the future, but this is basically, I don't think I've used this on anybody but Alphino. This is an excellent RM for Alphino. Because all the damage that he does is SUM based, This is a damage type, not a damage school. And his burst soul break is some SUM type damage, and both of his burst commands are SUM type damage. This is basically his RM. If you have Alphino and you use him frequently, you want to pick this up. Shantoto, already went over it with Materia. 30% white damage. I think I'd probably be using 25 increased mind over white damage, but if you know for some reason you're a mind stacker in your party and you believe you've got a ton of mind in your party and you want to increase your damage further, you'd be using 30% white instead. Not terribly useful, but there you go. And last but not least, we actually have a legitimately good weapon mage RM and 30% black damage with throw. This is a useful RM for somebody like, God, I don't know, Adia? See, it's not even good on Fusion. It's good on Fusion if all you have for Fusion is her burst, but if anyone's seen the way I play Fusion, I use both of her bursts, or both of her soul breaks, because they work together so well. Which makes Fusion, because of her fast casting and her ability to use Wrath, such a great character to use something like Ace Striker and Battleforged on. So I increase her damage output that way, but this probably wouldn't be the best option for her unless you only have Fusion's burst, in which case this is pretty damn good. Pinello does, but it is only a 15%er. So you would need another way to stack mind in the party, and the most common mind buff is the Magic and Mind one, available from people like, Yuna. Yuna is probably the most common with her burst right now. And those are 30%ers, and they're going to overwrite or be overwritten by Pinellos. So it is hard to stack mind buffs, and that's why I say this one's probably not as good as the 25% statistic. Generally, and we did go over this before when I was talking about Ricard's Dragoon's Determination, increasing your statistic below soft cap is going to be more beneficial than increasing your damage. The damage RMs are for when you've exceeded soft cap. And since it's so hard to hit the cap with mind, that's why it makes increasing your mind better. And now we have just useful stuff. Tyro's weakness damage. This is a nice one. Remember how we talked about Renoa's? 25% black damage if you're using someone like Shantoto, who's like her ability to exploit multiple vulnerabilities. Or Palom. Palom's a good one. Exploits multiple vulnerabilities, so you can't rely on one damage elemental. Someone like Tyro works really well for that, because this will increase all of your damage as long as you're exploiting weakness. And Palom relies on exploiting weakness with his burst, because that's what gives him his Instacast proc. So this is a useful one when, again, you can't find a specific 30% that works with something everyone does. Alright, now we have the interesting ones, where this is more for hitting vulnerability for characters that you don't, again, remember how I talked about the 40% support damage from Ferris, and the ability to use that on a support to increase their damage potential even though you don't have a soul break for them? This would be another situation where in a Sid mission, you need to hit a target condition, but you don't want to include someone in your party and make your party worse just to, get that element, you can throw this on one of your characters and hit that element because you're able to turn their attack into that element. So you just increase, you throw that in there every now and then, you hit your target condition, then you're good to go. And that applies to Black Fire Group, Cast Fire Veil on attack, single target Black Magic Lightning, Physical Group, not that useful, but I included in here because it's the highest group attack for physical. This used to be, or at least one version of this RM used to be so awesome back in the day for Norg, which we actually fought in the Final Fantasy VIII, not last week, because if you equip somebody with this and they just attacked group every turn with a physical, it would always make sure that the Norg's little blinkers were always on blue, and you never had to worry about that. All other 4 people in your party could just single target Norg, and that was it. This one is, wow, that's awesome. So remember the 2 lesser RMs that I talked about for Amarant and Delita, which would be start with Draw Fire and start with Magic Lure. This is just Sentinel, which is better, but can stack with those. So if you can start a night off with Sentinel, and then use something like Draw Fire, then you've got a huge defensive buff, or you know, other stuff. So this is really nice. Curalas is here because those other ones that I was showing was useful sub 99. They should have been in the same category, you're right. But these are level 65, random chance, while Curalas is a level 99. Sentinel does not give resistance. Better to combo with Magic Lure unless you're trying to exploit something and don't have wall or something, and you're trying to exploit Guardbringer. So you can stack defense that way by using Draw Fire and Sentinel together. Give yourself a ton of defense. Good night, Strider. Alright, we got Vanille, that white, but this is not Holy Element. So if you need to deal white damage, I don't know. These are all pretty rare and niche. I just figured I'd show these to you in case you ever felt like you had trouble hitting like an element like lightning or fire. Is really that the only 2 we have? Lightning and fire. I mean, obviously this is probably, no, it's absolutely the most important RM here. This is, I believe, the only good right now on Squall's Bursal Break 2, because of the speed it allows him to use his Soul Break, his Bursal Break commands. However, this will be very important down the line, because we're going to be getting Full Throttle, in which we cannot generate Soul Break. So there's no, and we start out with 3 Soul Break gauges at the start of the fight. So there's no reason at all to use stuff like Mako Might or Ace Striker. So we have to increase our potential to deal damage on the other ways. And since we have 3 Soul Break gauge to start out the fight, having this 66% cast speed reduction with Orlando's Thunder God is really good for that. Really, really good for that. It's probably the best Full Throttle RM there is. So look into getting this. We are starting Full Throttle soon, so it's gonna be relevant. I don't auto battle without experienced RMs, so I guess there are people that do, so. I don't like it good in general. The damage output increase that it gives you is not terribly good compared to damage RMs. The 30% damage RMs. It sounds like it would be, but when you consider that Thunder God doesn't increase ATB at all, the 66% cast speed reduction is not a terribly strong damage increase, except for people that can like uniquely benefit from it, like Squall. So yeah, that's the end of the list. Wow, that took 2 hours. Does anyone have any questions? Like the Xenogears song. I did too. I didn't get as sidetracked as much as I usually do. So I expected this to take a little less. Thank you very much, Jimbo.
Great guide as usual.
Yes, I did go over the experience RMs. Here, I'll put them on screen for you. They're very, very good. Because I made this list before the Final Fantasy VII event came out. So, Alina gets 30%er like Zell does. I left to eat during the Celeste talk at company. Suggestion for RM to use for comparison to the damage stacks in Spellblade. I very much appreciate it, Gutsy. At least you got a little icon now. Let's see. Celeste is... It really depends, because she's used in so many different situations. And those different situations have her doing different things, because... say her burst commands, for instance, on her burst 2, she has Holy and Ice Elemental, and they're both 4 hits. No, not 4 hits. Her AoE command is 2 hits, while her first command is 4 hits. So you're going to be doing a lot, and you're going to have a lot of room to increase your damage with those. So a 30% Tyros would probably work really well with her. Because Celeste is one of those characters, if you look at her Burst Soul Break 2, there's no real benefit to casting it multiple times. Is there a link to this? No, there is not. Alls I've written down here is cherry-picked useful RMs. But all the RMs here can be found on the Enlier spreadsheet. Though I guess some people don't have trouble looking at that on their phones and stuff. But Celeste is also useful when she's just exploiting vulnerability with other elements. So, and those are she's only able to exploit those elements with 2-hit attacks. Like water, for instance. So increasing her damage potential doesn't really work, or her increasing damage output with one of these doesn't really help that much there, because you're more likely to cap. So in that case, what would I do? Dual cast? Yeah. I trade off the less easy to look at for the increased amount of information. So I don't ever have to look at the PDF. Instead, I just use a single utility, and it works well for me. Though I totally understand that people want to use the PDF. Greg's didn't make it onto the list. It's not really that good. Just does a lot of stuff. Protect shell, haste, beginning of the battle for a single person. Not terribly useful. The haste can be. Some of the haste record materials aren't bad. However, protect shell is whatever, because that's something that needs to be on the entire party. So it's not a particularly good RM.